Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Monday, it's January 13th. Today is day 465. An update of what's happened in the Middle East over the weekend as this week has begun. Quite a few of the updates this week come from the broader Middle East, but I wanted to start in Gaza. The White House said today that we can get this Hamas-Israel deal done this week amid reports of an emerging hostage deal. Talks to finalize the remaining details are to be held tomorrow morning in Doha, according to officials who were in conversation with Reuters. And meanwhile, Al Jazeera reporters identified the north of Gaza as a ghost area. They published an article today saying that 5,000 people have been killed or are missing due to Israel's siege on North Gaza in the past 100 days. They've said that there have been brutal attacks in the north of Gaza and that those attacks have intensified amid the talks of potential mediated agreements between Israel and Hamas. Meanwhile, 9,500 Palestinians have been injured as a result of the Israeli military operation in the north of Gaza. That began at the beginning of October, according to medical sources. But in terms of the ceasefire negotiations, Israel and mediators have agreed upon a draft about a potential ceasefire deal in Gaza. It's been forwarded to Hamas now. This is according to two senior Israeli officials. There is a response expected within the next 24 hours. Here are the basic frameworks of the deal. The first phase that's emerged would allow for the release of 33 hostages. These would be categorized in what's considered a humanitarian group. This includes women, children, men over the age of 55, those who are sick or ill, according to Israeli officials. Hamas is yet to respond about the condition of those who might be sick, though Israeli sources believe that most of all of those 33 would be hostages that are alive. According to the deal, the Israeli Defense Forces are not expected to withdraw from Gaza until all of the hostages are returned, but they would allow movement of residents from the south of the Gaza Strip into the north. 16 days after the agreement is signed, discussions about the second phase of the deal would begin. Ultimately, this would lead to the release of the remaining hostages. So it's said that there are 100 hostages remaining in Gaza. It's believed that up to 60 or so of them could still be alive. And this deal's implementation would require a cabinet discussion in Israel and the government of Israel's approval, along with the time frame allowing for the potential petitions of the High Court of Justice in Israel. So that's where things stand. We may know more, by the time you're watching this video. President-elect Trump has been saying if the hostages are not released by his inauguration, which is set for January 20th, there will be hell to pay. And a lot of news sources have been saying, but what does that mean? So the Washington Post last night had an article addressing the question, and the head of the Israel Policy Forum, Koplow, responded. He said, all hell to pay is a compelling and catchy phrase, but what it means genuinely matters if Hamas decides that President-elect Trump is bluffing. So Koplow wrote, this is a direct quote, if Hamas calls the bluff, and it turns out that Trump doesn't have a strategy to make Hamas pay, then the bellicose rhetoric won't be cost-free. It'll actually backfire and make releasing the hostages even harder. And then he goes on to describe there's two options where Trump could essentially exact more devastating consequences upon Gaza. Israel's had this bombing campaign on Gaza since October of 2023. And so hell to pay could mean lifting restrictions, the very few restrictions that exist on the Israeli military already, so letting there be more aggression on the Gaza Strip, or it could mean that, so that would mean more death tolls, etc. Or most analysts assert that military attaches have already been so severe that there couldn't be more hell to pay than what's already been exacted upon Gaza. Another option would be for Trump to support the host of right-wing Israeli politicians, what they've long clamored for, that there would be a total shutoff of humanitarian assistance to Gaza and the war-ravaged territory already. But this would involve the potential of huge international blowback, which might not ultimately result in the hostages, being released. So hopefully, we'll hear good news that there are negotiations that are accepted, within hours. That's our hope and our prayer. And other updates, the UN and Israel are arguing over who would fill the gap in terms of UNRWA, the UN aid agency for Palestinians. Once they stop operating in Gaza and the West Bank later this month, and the new Israeli law comes into force, and Israel's reliance on U.S. weapon supplies is likely to shift drastically once Israel begins to produce its own investment in domestic heavy weapon production. The IDF also announced that 5 soldiers were killed and 8 were seriously wounded in combat in North Gaza in the last days. In Israel, hundreds of demonstrators blocked roads in Jerusalem, protesting the emergence of a deal because only 30 of the 98 total hostages remaining in Gaza will be released. In Israel, there is a call for all hostages to be released, not just some. There was an Israeli airstrike that killed 5 people in South Lebanon on Friday. That was announced over the weekend. And Israel bombed a power station and 2 ports in the Houthi-controlled Yemen on Friday as well, in retaliation for a Houthi strike against Israel. Today, there was a missile from Yemen that was intercepted before it crossed into Israeli territory. And Iran this month launched its most extensive military exercises in decades in response to what an Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps spokesperson described as new security threats. An Iraqi strike in the country's east on Friday killed 4 Islamic State members, according to 2 of their senior leaders. And Syria's intelligence directorate thwarted a planned Islamic State attack on the Damascus Shia shrine, according to Syrian state news. The Wall Street Journal also talked about Syria's Alawites, the sect of Assad's, who are fearing for their future. Members of this religious minority say that they're worried about discrimination under the new regime, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and that government, and risk of attacks by the country's many militias or gangs who would seek revenge for abuses of the Assad era. They pointed to several recent incidents, including alleged extrajudicial killings and the destruction of religious shrines. They say that they were beginning to resemble a pattern of the anti-Alawite acts, according to reports. The spokesperson for HTS did not respond or provide comments. Lebanon's Prime Minister Najib Mikati met with HTS and their leader Ahmad al-Shara on Saturday, according to reports. And the U.S., French, and German envoys have warned that Syria's HTS and its appointment of foreign jihadists to senior military posts is a significant security concern and harmful to their international reputation. EU foreign ministers will meet in late January to discuss easing Syria's sanctions. And so that's under discussion, as Saudi Arabia's foreign minister urged top EU diplomats gathered in Riyadh to lift those sanctions. Italy yesterday released an Iranian engineer who was wanted by the U.S. over a drone strike that killed 3 U.S. troops in Jordan last year. And President Joe Biden looked back on his diplomatic and military legacy in the Middle East in his final foreign policy speech that was given today, amid reports of this U.S.-backed hostage deal between Hamas and Israel, while there's been national criticism of Biden's pro-Israel policies since October 7th. An official delegation of settler leaders is reportedly set to attend Donald Trump's inauguration on January 20th. And finally, I just wanted to close with a spiritual note, practice that you might want to consider as the new year continues. This is about naming our intentions. And this is a possibility as we relate to our collective efforts and working towards a ceasefire and a hostage release agreement, an end to the ongoing bombing of Gaza and violence in the Middle East. These are things that we can do, such as a breath prayer and spiritual practices. You can do this individually or as a community, as a prayer group, a small group, or even as your family. It's a way of putting down a marker, reminding ourselves of our commitments of our hearts and our minds and our souls as we advocate for justice and peace in the Middle East. A few intentions for myself and those of us at Churches for Middle East Peace. Might we commit to allowing God to continue to expand our hearts for all of the people of the Middle East, in Gaza, in Palestine, and in Israel, Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, Egypt, and the entire Middle East. May we continue to ground in our collective power, to strategize, to learn from one another, to practice courage and persistence, to do the necessary work of truth-telling. Might we hold on to hope, even when we do not see light on the horizon. I was reminded recently of Amanda Gorman, the poet. She says, there is always light if we're only brave enough to see it, if we're only brave enough to be it. So thank you to all of you who are such a brave light. I thought that was a beautiful encouragement. Someone shared that with me this week, to be a brave light in the world. May it be so in the name of Christ. Amen.